Hi, everyone. We'll give it a few minutes because I think we have quite a few more people coming on. Okay, well, welcome everyone tonight. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kristin Allen, and I work for the City of Decatur as the Affordable Housing Fellow. I just wanted to thank everyone for participating tonight and our panelists and facilitators as we begin the first of 3 community conversations around housing affordability in Decatur and discuss a specific recommendation of the Affordable Housing Task Force to increase the supply of affordable housing within Decatur's neighborhoods by allowing duplex, triplex, and quadplex construction in addition to single-family homes. First, I'd like to introduce Mayor Patty Garrett, who will start us off with a welcome.
Great, thanks, Kristin, and welcome everyone. Appreciate you joining us for this first community conversation. We appreciate you being here and want you to know that this is really just the beginning as we begin to look at what policy might look when we look at allowing increased density in single family neighborhoods. And we really want to gather input over these first community conversations and let you know that the policies are not yet created, that we're going to use these conversations to create the policy. And we're going to take that input and then draft some language, bring that back out to our community and get additional input before we make any sort of changes to our zoning code. So appreciate you being here. We definitely want to have the conversation about, is there a way to help address our need, our significant need for affordable housing in Decatur with some assistance for some changes in our zoning code in single family neighborhoods. So again, welcome. Thanks for participating. And we have a rock star panel here, and I know we'll all enjoy hearing from them. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mayor Garrett. I'm going to go ahead and share a couple points just to go over to familiarize everyone with what our discussion is over tonight. So this is a picture of some existing, what we call missing middle housing in Decatur, a mix of duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes. And this is one of the recommendations of the Affordable Housing Task Force, is to look at reallowing these housing types that used to be built in Decatur, but now they are disallowed and only single family housing is allowed to be built. So what is missing middle housing? Missing middle housing is a range of house-scaled buildings with multiple units. They're compatible in scale and form with detached single-family homes and located in walkable neighborhoods. Duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and small apartment buildings are all considered missing middle housing types, and their densities fall between that of a single-family home and a larger multi-family development. So why now for Decatur missing middle housing? Why this discussion? This actually started back in 2008 with the Affordable Housing Study, where that study looked at the success of a community and that single family developments in many ways can hinder development and different types of housing in a city. Onto this 2010 strategic plan, and that plan called for allowing smaller homes and encouraging other creative housing types in single family neighborhoods. The 2017 Oakhurst for Everyone report talked about ensuring availability of diverse and affordable housing and providing for a variety of housing types and prices. And then on to 2018 in the Housing Summit report, this report discussed that traditional neighborhoods featured units of all types, from single family homes to duplexes, triplexes, and quads, that provided settled workforce housing within existing residential neighborhoods. And the latest report, the 2020 Affordable Housing Task Force report, took this a step further and actually recommended that the city consider policies to increase the supply of affordable housing options by allowing duplex, triplex, and quadplex construction in current single-family zoning. The Decatur strategic plan that was just accepted by the commission the other night, on Monday night, Decatur 2030, calls for ambitious outcomes for housing and other initiatives throughout the city. And that's what the community has been calling for, and to also ensure that each neighborhood provides its fair share of affordable housing. So this is kind of the background from different reports throughout the years where missing middle has come up. And why did the task force look specifically at our neighborhoods for increasing density? It has to do with how Decatur is zoned. Our citywide zoning is 70% single family zoning and 30% other types. And if you look within Decatur's neighborhoods, just at the housing types within our specific neighborhoods, 90% are detached homes and only 10% are other types such as duplexes and triplexes. Other cities have gone down this road and implemented different policy changes. So this is a quick look at what some other cities have done. And we can talk about this as we think about what is right for Decatur. So Raleigh, for example, included by right duplexes and townhomes. Minneapolis approved duplexes and triplexes, and also that up to 2 units can be added to an existing home. Portland is one of the most aggressive policies where they allow up to 4 homes on a lot, and they've decreased the allowable size for a single family home and for multi-units and eliminated parking requirements. Austin allows duplexes and also removes the common wall requirement so that duplexes can be attached by a breezeway and spaced a little bit apart, more like two single homes, and allows larger multifamily. It also reduces parking requirements. Charlotte is allowing duplexes and triplexes, and in California, that's a statewide initiative where now up to 4 homes are allowed on an existing lot. Some of the terms that come with that in California are that the homes must be owner occupied for 3 years, no short-term rentals are allowed, and they've really reduced parking requirements. So no more than 1 parking space is allowed per unit, and the parking requirement is actually disallowed if it's within 1/2 mile of transit. Atlanta is having these community conversations now as well. And right now their policies call for adding up to 3 units on a lot, which would be a duplex plus an ADU, and 8 to 12 units if it's within 1/2 mile of transit. They've also considering removing parking minimums, having some affordability requirements for the larger units. So those are what some other cities have done. And now tonight we'll start talking about what might look right for Decatur. So what to expect in this session? The policies are not yet written. So these conversations will solicit input from residents to shape the policy recommendations. So we'll take the input from tonight and from the other sessions to help us start drafting policy recommendations. We'll start with a video, and then we have 3 panelists that I will introduce in a little while who will answer some pre-selected questions. Then we'll go into breakout rooms to provide for community input. There'll be some time at the end for the breakout rooms to report out, and then time for additional questions. You can also go to the website, decaturga.com/affordable housing. There's some contact information for me, as well as a phone number to call with questions and a survey. Leave you with a couple of our other existing duplex, triplex, quadplexes within the city of Decatur, and a couple of pictures of units in other cities, kind of a bungalow style. This one is 2 duplexes that are set apart, and then a little bit older duplex.
The Decatur we know and love today is the result of over 4 decades of planning and follow through, and by many measures, a highly rated school system, a destination downtown, a strong real estate market. That work has been successful, but success can be a double-edged sword. With limited land and a desirable quality of life, prices rise, often well beyond the reach of workforce and middle-class people.
We're both Emory professionals. We have a growing family. We're working 40 hours a week and still kind of having trouble finding location where we can actually buy or purchase in the city of Decatur. We kind of find ourselves renting around the city, but we would love to be, here.
So I teach in city schools in Decatur. This is my 15th year teaching in the district. I've taught at Oakhurst and now my 5th year at Renfro. I love it here and I live where I teach. I love living in this community. I walk everywhere and I ride my bike, but it's difficult. I've lived in several different rentals in the district. I've lived in garage apartments. I've lived in duplexes. I've lived in standalone houses. And every year it is more and more difficult to find something that's actually affordable. And that's actually my current situation right now. We've been living in a rental for about 4 years and recently found out that once again, we have to move.
I have served the community of the City of Decatur for 11 years as an officer. 4 of those years, I was able to rent in the Oakhurst area. After renting for 4 years, my family and I decided we wanted to purchase a home. And as we looked around Decatur, it was obvious to us that we could not afford to live in the city, so we had to look elsewhere. I just believe this fact that I work and serve the community and serve this city, that it is very unfortunate that we're not able to purchase homes in the area in which we serve.
I have lived in Decatur and worked in Decatur for over 25 years. My husband and I have raised our children here. We've grown to love this neighborhood. We really want to stay right in this area. We want to have a little yard, a little dirt to play in. We want to stay close to the neighbors that we are so close to emotionally. And we're getting worried because there just don't seem to be many affordable options that suit our needs.
The residents and staff in the city of Decatur have been talking about the importance of affordable housing for over a decade. And during this time, home prices and rents have only gone steadily upward. This problem is pressing and it's not going away. That's why in the summer of 2019, the city convened the Affordable Housing Task Force and asked us to study the problem and make recommendations about how the city can best address it. Many of these recommendations are focused on our city's neighborhoods and how to make them more economically inclusive.
Historically, traditional neighborhoods have addressed economic diversity with a variety of housing types: single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, and quads, even granny flats and small townhomes. Decatur's been no exception and has featured many of these through the years, some of which remain. They're what's now called the missing middle, smaller scale buildings distinct from the larger multifamily projects we see downtown and near transit that are compatible with single family homes. This is Drexel Avenue in Decatur's Lenox Place neighborhood. Walking down it, you'd likely experience it as a pleasant single family street, but you'd be mistaken because hidden in plain view among the homes of this quiet 4-block stretch are 40 naturally occurring missing middle housing units at varying levels of affordability. Such integration was once commonplace in Decatur, and the duplexes, triplexes, and quads we see today were all built or retrofitted in years past as a legal and encouraged solution to the housing needs of the day. But in 1988, they were outlawed in response to challenges we now find unfamiliar: disinvestment and absentee ownership. Today, our pressing need for more affordable housing exists in stark contrast to the 1980s. What was once a seemingly practical response to decline now exists as an artificial economic barrier, a new form of redlining that prevents all but the highest income households from living in Decatur's neighborhoods. This need not be our destiny or our legacy. We can choose a different path. Among the many recommendations of the Affordable Housing Task Force report are efforts to once again allow these more inclusive missing middle housing types that were once commonplace in Decatur. With additional housing options scaled comparably to single-family homes, but configured to include smaller dwellings, we can help overcome the policies that have contributed to Decatur's loss of racial and economic diversity. We can create space intentionally for workforce and middle-class people currently priced out of our neighborhoods. In response to the recommendations put forth by the Affordable Housing Task Force, the city is currently at work on a proposed zoning update with the potential to make our neighborhoods the welcoming and economically diverse places we want them to be. To do so, they'll need you, your input, and your support. This is our opportunity to shape our neighborhoods according to our values, where service workers and young couples are just as welcome as those of increased means, where teachers and police officers and freelancers can share the neighborhood with lawyers and investment bankers, and where our long-term residents can downsize to more manageable and affordable space without leaving the neighborhood and the neighbors they've come to love. Let your voice be heard. Learn more, get involved, and encourage our city leadership to make this bold investment in an inclusive future.
Okay, we have three fabulous panelists tonight that I'd like to go ahead and introduce, and they will do a series of Q&A before we go into our breakout rooms. So first is Bill Bowling. Bill Bowling serves as chairman and senior advisor of Atlanta nonprofit Foodwell Alliance, providing resources and support to local growers to connect and build healthier communities. Bill founded the Atlanta Community Food Bank in 1979 and served as its executive director until 2015. He has convened and facilitated the Atlanta Regional Housing Forum, a collaborative effort of more than 20 organizations and a quarterly gathering of affordable housing stakeholders from all sectors, public, private, nonprofit, philanthropic, and concerned citizens, since he founded it in 1984.
Hey, that's plenty, Kristin.
Okay. On to Philip Cuffey. Phil Cuffey is a seasoned real estate investor with significant experience in restoration and property management and sales. Mr. Cuffey has played an integral role in the development and implementation and management of a significant number of civic and community organizations and projects, including the Zoza Institute for Mentoring Foster Youth and Lifelong Leadership, the Bell Mentoring Initiative. He has also served on the Big Brothers and Big Sisters Association of Philadelphia and currently serves on the board of the Beacon Hill Black Alliance for Human Rights and is co-chair of the Equity and Housing Committee. He mentors middle and high school boys at the Decatur Housing Authority Teen Center. Phil and his wife live in Decatur and are proud parents of Decatur High School graduates. And we also have Elka Wolf Davidson. Elka Davidson is the president of Davidson Consulting, a business working with nonprofit and public sector organizations in the areas of affordable housing, neighborhood revitalization, and healthy communities. She has many clients, including Enterprise Community Partners and ANDP. And from 2018 to 2014, Elka worked closely with the Atlanta Beltline Partnership on design and execution of affordable and workforce development strategies for the Beltline. As a Decatur resident, Elka served as chairperson of the 2019 Affordable Housing Task Force. Elka's involvement with each committee of the task force and her influence in shaping the final recommendations of the 2020 task force report has served as a foundation for Decatur's ongoing progress and goals around housing affordability. So thank you so much to our panelists, and I'll go ahead and start off with our first question that I'm directing the question to Elka, but the other panelists can feel free to chime in as they would like. So Elka, there were several recommendations by the Decatur Affordable Housing Task Force to add supply of affordable housing to Decatur. Why were zoning reforms for duplex, triplex, and quadplexes put forth as one of those recommendations?
Thanks, Kristin. Pleasure to be here. Nice to see all of you. I'm going to start with giving you a little bit of context about what the situation with affordable housing was when we were convened in 2019. So between 2008 and 2020, Decatur's population had increased 31%, but new housing units had only increased 16%. Average rents during that time had jumped 119%. Let me repeat that. Average rents had jumped 119%. Average housing purchase prices had increased 72% for detached homes and 51% for attached homes. And the median home value in Decatur in 2018 was $667,000 and change, compared to the Metro Atlanta number of $319,000 and change. And critically, 24% of owners in Decatur and 49% of renters in Decatur are currently cost burdened. That is, we're spending more than 30% of our household income on housing. And I don't think it's inappropriate to say that we are in a crisis when it comes to affordable housing in Decatur. As Kristin mentioned, 70% of land in Decatur is residentially zoned, and 90% of that land is zoned single family, which since 1988 has only allowed single family detached housing to be developed. Now, we all know Decatur is small, it's fairly developed, there's a limited vacant land, which is very, very expensive. And we on the task force recognized that a key way to create affordable units would be to increase the number of units that could be developed or redeveloped on any given parcel. It's kind of basic capitalism 101. The more there is of a consumer item, the less it costs. The less there is of a consumer item, the more it costs. In addition, looking forward, the Atlanta Regional Commission projects approximately another 1,700 households are going to come to Decatur between 2020 and 2030. And between 2030 and 2040, another 1,700 new households are going to come to Decatur. So we need to be producing new units in general to absorb this population and to ensure more affordability in the face of this growth. So as Kristin mentioned, and the video mentioned, before the late 80s, single family districts in Decatur allowed for duplexes, triplexes, and quads to be developed. And regardless of what part of town you live in, I know you have some of these developments on your block. I live on Garden Lane, we have a number of them. Why did we change our mind in the late 80s? I think we'll talk about this more, but I don't think we can underestimate the impact of racism and classism, whether it was implicit or explicit. Zoning has for over a century been used to exclude certain people from certain parts of cities, particularly low-income people and people of color. In addition, I just want to propose that neighborhoods and cities go through phases of growth. There's like a neighborhood life cycle, if you will, from distressed and deteriorating to stabilizing to revitalizing to gentrifying. And at the end of the 1980s, Decatur was struggling with some distressed housing and deteriorating neighborhoods and wanted to stabilize their housing markets and increase the number of single family dwellings, both for tax purposes and for kind of general quality of life. But right now, that's not where we are. We are clearly in the gentrifying or even gentrified phase of neighborhood life, and we need different tools. And ironically, what we decided on the task force, what we recommended on the task force, was that we needed some of our older tools, including bringing back some density to our single family neighborhoods.
Now, close on time, Ilka.
How much?
Time's up, but if
Time's
you want
up.
to wrap it up.
Okay. So I'll stop, and I'm sure we'll get into more of a conversation about that. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ilka. Okay, so our second question is for Phil Cuffey. What do you know about past housing policies and why these multi-units were disallowed in neighborhoods in Decatur? Phil may need to be unmuted.
Yeah, Phil, we can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, all right, thank you for the question. I would like to start by giving a little context in terms of what was happening in the city of Decatur, as well as in our country during the time of when single family exclusive zoning came about. It was adopted by communities across the country shortly after the Supreme Court struck down explicit racial zoning in 1917. And it's what many activists call the new redlining, quite frankly. So racial discrimination, as we all know, has created an enormous wealth gap between white and Black people, and the single family zoning perpetuates that inequality. So before I get into what Elka did such a great job with it describing in terms of the 80s, I want to go back just a little bit further to our city in 1915, where the zoning law actually designated residents by race, by block. So literally neighborhoods were designated by race and by block. And so as I mentioned, in 1917, the Supreme Court struck down that explicit racial discrimination. But then there were other policies that later took form, including in 1933, when the federal redlining policy was created through maps to identify high-risk areas by race, and that effectively blocked investments in communities of color. And this was during a time of clearly up to the Depression. So there was a federal agency called the Homeowners Mortgage Corporation, and its job was to allow people to get back on their feet by buying up bundles of foreclosed mortgages and then refinancing them to allow people to continue to stay in their homes. And it was very effective, but it did so in a way that excluded certain communities of color. So let's go to 1934, when policy was such that the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, was created. And FHA used those same maps to identify high-risk areas by race. Its job was pretty much to underwrite development. So developers would come to FHA with plans to develop communities, and FHA would do the underwriting with the understanding that restrictive covenants be included in those deeds so that those properties would not be bought by people of color. So once again, we see the effect of policy having on housing. And then later in 1938, right here in Fair City, there was a policy that prevented interracial households, except where separate quarters, including sanitation facilities, were allowed for masters and servants. And if any of you have seen the movie, The Help, there was a reference to that occurring. Also in the 1930s through the 60s, when there were a number of initiatives, including the GI Bill, when soldiers came home to America and they wanted to invest in their communities. Once again, these policies blocked investment in communities of color and proliferated investments in other communities. And to the point where between 1930s and 1960s, African Americans and other people of color received less than 2% of the FHA and VA mortgages, including the GI Bill. In the 1940s, you had the urban renewal and eminent domain policies, which here in the city of Decatur resulted in 200 Black families being moved and creating the Allen Wilson development. And the Beacon Hill Business District was uprooted. So it's important for us to understand the impact of policy and housing policies and how it impacts us today. And it can be said that policy is part of the reason that we're in this position today, and perhaps a change in policy will help us yield a better tomorrow. But let me just say in closing that there was another, I think it's a significant event that happened around policy, and it had to do with the important financing arm. And the financing arm that allowed homes to be repaired, for homes to be purchased. And that involved, in 1992, a settlement of $42 million settlement of discrimination in hiring and lending between DOJ and the Decatur Federal Savings and Loan Bank, which was awarded to 48 Black families. And that really was a significant development because it was really symptomatic of the problems that in financing that contributed to the racial gap that we see today. So with that, I'd like to wrap up and move on to the next question.
Thank you, Phil, for that very thoughtful discussion. The next question is for Bill. What do you think of Decatur's current housing and the trajectory of housing in Decatur over time?
Thanks, Kristin. And I would, Elka, I think, answered this very well and given us context as Philip just did. Generally been doing a great job, right? People have moved here. We're generally happy as citizens. We've had great leadership here in the city for many years. We've got great schools. I know my wife and I moved here in 1984 with two small children. We moved here because we knew the schools were good, and we moved here because of its diversity. So we have a lot to celebrate. At the same time, and Elka said this very well, housing choices have declined, prices have gone up. We have done a good job building out around MARTA. Other places in the city look to us. In our recommendations from the task force, I can tell you as one who facilitates the Regional Housing Forum, all through the region, people are looking at those recommendations and how that process came about. All through the region, people are looking to Decatur as a model. So we have a lot to celebrate. But we also lot to do. I think in the video we saw very well, we have folks that would love to live here because they work here and they serve us. There are teachers and our policemen and people that work in government buildings, and they would love not to drive to Riverdale. They would love to be here. So that's a negative, that's a challenge for us. I think conversations at Legacy Park, the only big part of land that we have left, a lot of creative ideas, but some of that got pretty ugly. As we all moved here because we love it and we want it to stay the same. But it's not going to stay the same. And it didn't stay the same from the 1980s when I moved here. So you, as Elka and Philip both said, you can't stop the market. The market will be itself, and we've got people that are going to move here and want to move here. So we've got a lot to build on. We've learned a lot through the different stages we've gone through the years. We've got some great recommendations, and I would say, again, that our inclusive process, I mean, we started back in 2018, it's now 2021, and we're still listening to the citizens. We're still trying to figure out the best way for us to move forward. So our process has been great. We've got a lot to celebrate, but we've got a lot of challenges ahead because things can never stay the same. So we're in a stage right now. And I feel very good about the process that we're in and the groups that we have, the Better Together that listens to citizens. And that's why people want to be here.
Thank you, Bill. In the essence of time, I'm going to move down to a question for Elka. Some common concerns related to density are traffic, school enrollment, and property values. Can you speak to these concerns?
I can speak to them briefly, and maybe we'll get into a broader discussion when we're in our smaller groups. So I know that one of the biggest kind of pushbacks about bringing affordable housing into a neighborhood is, I don't want it to negatively affect my property values. And I think this is a struggle, not just in Decatur, but all over the country. And it's the tension between wanting to maximize a social good and protect your own individual good. Decaturrites have been saying for 12 years, we want more affordable housing. But when it comes down to it, we also have equity in our homes, and some of us are depending on it for retirement, and we don't want that to be impacted. The good news is that studies do show that unless affordable housing is concentrated in a declining area, in a neighborhood that's in that kind of distressed, deteriorating phase, it has no effect, or sometimes even has positive effect on nearby property values. And I would recommend, and Kristin might be able to send a link to a really great article that the NYU Center for Housing Policy Insights put out called "Don't Put It Here, Does Affordable Housing Cause Property Values to Decline?" And this is a little bit of a meta-analysis. They looked at a range of studies over time and kind of summarized what the big takeaways were. And one of the big takeaways was, if you locate affordable housing in strong neighborhoods with high property values and low poverty rates, low existing poverty rates, they're unlikely to have adverse impacts on nearby property values. And in fact, mixed income neighborhoods have been found to maintain value and be attractive to new residents. That's what I'll say briefly about property values. On the traffic front, much of the traffic in Decatur is due to folks commuting in and out for work. So one of the pieces of data that really blew our minds in the task force was that only 4% of Decatur residents work in Decatur. I'll repeat that, only 4% of Decatur residents work in Decatur. So that means 96% of Decatur residents are commuting out. Those who are working and those who aren't working at home are commuting out. And the vast majority of folks who work in Decatur are commuting back home. So to the extent that we're able to build more affordable housing in Decatur, it will reduce the impact of that traffic. And most of the jobs in Decatur are in the public administration, educational services, construction and healthcare, most of which cluster around the 50 to 80% of area median income wage level. So they're not making huge amounts of money. And given the kind of average house prices and the increase in rental rates that I discussed earlier, those folks cannot afford to live in Decatur. And I will just say, in addition, ARC projects in these sectors, another 1,700 new jobs are going to come to Decatur by 2030, and another 1,300 above that between 2030 and 2040. If we don't have housing to absorb those folks, the traffic is going to increase significantly. And for schools, I would just say that both conversations with the City Schools of Decatur and national studies show that actually traditional single-family homes tend to have 2 to 3 times the number of school-age children than those who are living in multifamily housing. And the duplexes, triplexes, and quads that we're talking about here are typically smaller than single-family housing new construction, and they have fewer bedrooms, and they tend to attract a more diverse set of residents, including empty nesters, singles, and younger couples with fewer or no kids. So actually, there's a lot of assumption and projection that if you build higher density housing, you're going to overwhelm the schools. That has just not been the experience in Decatur or nationally. So
thank you, Ilka. And to wrap it up before we go to our breakout rooms, I have one more question for Phil. And this is based around the question of equity. Do you think this policy change would increase equity in Decatur, and how?
Thank you for that question, Kristin. And that question really had me thinking, because this issue of equity, which is so important to any community that wants to call itself inclusive and emphasize the importance of diversity and community building. And my sense is that a change in the policy in itself will not be the answer to increasing equity alone. There must be other elements in the equation, in my humble opinion, to create an environment that promotes equity. As Bill had been talking about this, the marketplace itself, that's an engine unto itself. And it has some variables that is out of the control of any one of us. I think it's important that we address creatively as a community ways to create some incentives for this equity creation to occur. And I think we could really, it presents an opportunity for us, quite frankly, to come up with some ways to creatively provide incentives so that for example, home ownership can be made a possibility for individuals who have long been denied an opportunity to be a homeowner. And there are first-time home buying programs in the county that are out there that could be a way of offsetting some of the costs to bring down the barriers of home ownership that could be possible. The city could get into that game by either matching some funds or creating other incentives. We have major employers in the city of Decatur. Agnes Scott College comes to mind. Of course, the school district. There are ways that employers have provided benefits or incentives for their employees to live
I'm
near
going to give you
where
a
they work.
10-second wrap-up time. Sorry. Sorry to
Okay,
interrupt.
that's fair. That's fair. But I will end it by saying it's clearly an opportunity to create equity incentives so that we could bring equity to the city of Decatur with a more diverse population.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much to our panelists for those thoughtful answers.
Okay.
And I know we're going to breakout rooms next. I believe Renee will be posting the links for you to click to get into your breakout group shortly. And you will have a facilitator in your group to lead you through a few questions so that you can provide some input for us to get started down this road. And thank you very much. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. We're going to do a report out from each room to get feedback on how everything went. So I will start with Angela Threadgill, if your group wants to do a report out.
Yes, so we were group number 1. And so we had the 4 questions, of course, as part of our discussion guide. And do you want me to kind of focus on the 3rd and 4th questions?
That'd be great.
Okay. Yeah. So that 3rd question is talking about if the city adopts a policy that provides for more missing middle housing, what are the positive impacts and what are the potential negative impacts? And so what our group had mentioned is, as far as the positive impacts, they see that there will be more economic and racial diversity within our city and our neighborhoods. They also commented on being able to work where you live as a positive impact, because ultimately that will decrease household transportation costs. And then, of course, living where you work, getting more involved in the community as positives. They, not necessarily that this is a potential negative impact, but there is a negative perception that these types of housing that they're typically they are rental, though they could be for purchase, but there's this perception of those households being more transient. And so there needs to be a little bit more storytelling about how these households are not necessarily transient, but how they're contributing to the community. And I think our group focused more on the negatives of the policy as if it wasn't adopted, like that we would become even more less inclusive than where we are today, and that was a big concern. And as far as the 4th question, kind of that decisional question of how the city could mitigate negative impacts. Again, we are focusing more on the perceptions and kind of doing a myth buster of, kind of what Elka did during her talking points about, the property values or the school enrollment, and just making sure that, those perceptions, that we're educating our community about the realities and the data, what the data is really showing. So I hope I did my group proud there, and maybe there'll be an opportunity if I've missed something that they can share that.
Yeah, definitely. Yes, if someone wants to raise their hand in a group that didn't get something put in, then please do. But we'll move on next to Phil's group, Phil Cuffey's group.
Bill, he's still muted.
Are you asking me to give a summary or someone
Yes.
else might do?
You or someone in your group, whoever you'd like to designate.
We actually didn't talk about who would do it. I would say this, we had a very lively discussion on the questions. I don't have the questions right in front of me. So if you want to ask the questions you want me to address.
Yeah, sure. Or if there's anyone else in your group that wants to take that on. But really the two we're looking at getting most predominantly the feedback is if the city adopts a policy that provides for more missing middle housing types in traditional detached single family neighborhoods, what are positive impacts the policy may create and what are potential negative impacts? And then what the city should do to mitigate negative impacts of potential missing middle policy.
Okay, clearly the positive impacts would be around diversity and equity and giving us a more rich community with various cultures, ideals, capabilities, really raising the level of potential of our community because more people are able to participate and enjoy the benefits of living in the city of Decatur. The one area where we thought the city could be active in is in dispelling any of the stereotypes that may come up. This sort of alludes to what Angela was saying. By having sessions like this, one idea came up is to have some door knocker information documents as another way of outreach to communicate the programs that the city might sponsor to get more people to come out to participate because not all of our neighbors are going to be reached in the way that we have reached out for this event, which I thought was very, very creative. There was a concern about the number of parking spaces in our neighborhoods. And as long as that was carefully planned for to avoid potential conflicts or problems with parking, that would be an area that could be a negative outcome if it's not properly addressed. So those are the two that come to mind. And I'm going to ask any of my group members to chime in.
Hello, I've returned.
Oh, there she is. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, my computer kicked me out for some reason, so I do apologize for that. What did group 2 discuss already? Is there anything I can add to the discussion?
Well, they discussed positives were diversity and equity, more people to enjoy the benefits. Phil said you discussed dispelling stereotypes, possibly door knockers, more information to get people involved, concern around the number of parking spaces. So is there anything else you want to add to that?
Yes, so I think that, so for question number 1, I just wanted to say that really what came out of that one is that everybody's first house was pretty small. It was small, and in Philip's case, it was a duplex. So that, and it was also a sense of pride and a sense of accomplishment being able to afford. And even though I think in Chandra's case, she said she was working 2 jobs to be able to afford her first home, but it was, but still, she was still able to afford a first home, and for the needs of a late 20s, early 30s person, which is not a large home. It is something smaller. So that was there. And yes, I think that was, I just wanted to kind of add that to what Philip probably already discussed as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. What about Elka's group?
Well, I'll give my take on it and then you guys add in if I miss anything. We had a lot of conversation about what's the right balance between pursuing the goals of the tree ordinance and pursuing the goals of developing affordable housing. that the people in my group didn't want to destroy tree canopy in order to increase density. There was some conversation about how in pursuit of that, we shouldn't be afraid to go up, but to build up, but that was a little bit in tension with other perspectives that said we need to keep whatever we build from a design perspective in alignment with the character of single family neighborhoods, which would kind of preclude going up. So we've got to figure out how to balance those two things. One of the group members had a really interesting kind of visual about like balancing these 3 points of a triangle: the pursuit of affordable housing, the protection of the tree canopy, and taking care of our seniors, many of whom are low income because they have older properties that tend to have older trees, and figuring out what's, from a policy perspective, what's the best way of balancing between the 3 points of that triangle. There was also some conversation about not wanting to build further out on a parcel in order to accommodate density, like keep it in I think it's the floor area ratio in alignment with single family design. So you don't take up more of the parcel itself with a structure, because that would destroy trees. We had a really interesting conversation about the tension between the number of people you could serve if you pursued a rental strategy that will require less subsidy versus really wanting to pursue home ownership kind of towards Philip's point as a way of redressing a lot of income inequality and the consequences of many decades of really crappy urban planning and land use planning. But identifying that, you know, one of the pieces of data in the report was the gap amount, like how much in subsidy I would need as someone at, you know, 60, 80, or 100% of area median income to be able to buy in Decatur was between $200,000 per unit for someone who was at 60% of AMI to $50,000 per unit for someone who was at 120% of area median income. And we were unable to resolve the tension, but encourage the city to do so, between using limited resources to serve fewer people but promote homeownership, and using limited resources to pursue a multifamily strategy that would serve more people. And there was some concern that if we were going to neighborhoods with, we want to increase density, and by the way, it's going to be a lot of rental housing, that there might actually be more pushback. And we were struggling with how to address that as well. And then we ended with having a conversation about the need to find more land, like to be able to get some lower than market rate land, both to develop affordable housing now, but also, as one of the members said, you know, we've got, you know, 3,500 new households in the next 20 years coming to Decatur. We're going to need more land to house them. We're going to need more land for schools to teach their kids. And we're landlocked. So how do we deal with that? No answers, a lot of questions.
Okay, does anyone else in the group want to chime in? If so, just raise your hand and Renee can unmute you. Okay, so we'll move on to, I believe John Thomas's group is next. Oh, and I think he needs to be unmuted, sorry.
Discovered that. I just discovered that. And I trust you can hear me now. Let's see, several things. I think to start with, there was in our group, which is a group of 4, modest group. I think there's strong support for affordable housing in a variety of aspects, and I think a frustration with how little we've accomplished so far in terms of affordable housing, and wanting to see more. I mean, for example, some frustration with what the 10% minimum for affordable housing on new developments, and thinking that that should be higher. If we're going to make progress, it's going to take it's going to take more of an effort on that. when we talked about positive and negative impacts, sort of as Angela reported earlier, our sense of negative impacts is that they're more likely if we don't do something. That the community will lose inclusivity, diversity. There's already been some loss of that, and other negative effects, potentially higher taxes for a variety of reasons, other negative impacts. I think we have some, maybe this is my point in particular, but some frustration with resistance to affordable housing. The classic not in my backyard reactions to when developments come along or proposed developments for affordable housing, and the reactions there. And often I'm going to suggest the reactions, the worries may be misplaced, maybe or at least exaggerated. I've some frustration there, which Maria will probably share too. When the Affordable Housing Task Force was in operation, we anticipated as the Education Committee an education effort that would head out into the community to try to change some minds and address some resistance to affordable housing. Then this little thing called the pandemic came along, and there wasn't, and we weren't going out in the community, and we weren't going to be able to recruit the other members of the task force to do that. So there's some frustration with that. I think that maybe the final point I would make that I thought was interesting, Ryan Sellers from the city made the point that if Decatur could really do something significant in terms of affordable housing, it could be a potential blueprint for other communities around the country, potentially other smaller cities, I would think in particular. And obviously there are a lot of those out there that might be considering these questions now themselves. And I'll stop there. If anybody else wants to add anything.
Great, and I think the last group is Maria. I think Paula ended up being in with another group, right? Oh no, okay, so Maria, you go ahead and then I'll get Paula after you.
Okay, did you want me to focus on which questions?
Probably the last two.
Okay, so when it came to question number 3, the group thought that they are looking for whether their neighbor wants to build more housing on a single family property in her neighborhood. Her current neighborhood has several duplexes, and new development on that property that her neighbor is proposing has her neighbors kind of heated, and they're hot about topography and housing values. Her neighbors really do want trees protected in this changing housing environment. It's a very diverse neighborhood housing wise, as well as the backgrounds of the residents that are there, but they really want to not lose tree canopy or have issues with water runoff, all of the different things that can happen with new construction. Another person from our group really also wanted to protect the tree canopy, but she said that at the same time, people want diversity until it hurts them. And so she really wants people to think about what they are able to give some up of or share in order to get more diverse housing in their neighborhoods. When it came to some of the things that we're currently doing with the environmental impact on properties, they wanted good environmental impacts to happen, as currently a lot of developers are building these huge mansions on properties, which are not good at all. And they wanted teachers and cops and lunch ladies to be able to live here. Community is more than single family homes, which I thought was a great quote from our group. They also believe that there are going to be a lot of NIMBYs against what we are proposing, but that the residents should really put their money where their mouth is. If they say they want diversity, if they value diversity, if they have lawn signs up that say, we value blah, 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 blah in our house, that they should really put their money where their mouth is. When it came to question number 4, the group thought that, or one of the members of our group thought that we should change a percentage of income and give breaks to owners of properties that are willing to do duplexes and quadplexes and triplexes, and that those low costs should be locked in. They should follow tree ordinances also again, and then look at different building types and what smaller housing types are possible on those properties. And we definitely need to look at expanding upon and educating people on housing trust opportunities in Decatur. And one kind of overarching theme that kind of carried from question to question was that the people in my group were tired of waiting. They just want us to do it. They said that we've been through so many iterations of affordable housing conversations and task force and plans, and that we should just get the work done immediately and predominantly lock in the houses that are currently here that are affordable, and find ways to keep those low costs and available and expand on them as we can.
Great, thank you. And Paula, you're up.
Sure. So I'm only going to add pieces that I didn't already hear. I had a lot of check marks of yep. Okay. I would like to start though with addressing question number 1 very briefly, which is it depended upon the age of the participant as to what their first house was like or their next home was like when they left their childhood home. So younger people went either to a college dorm or to an apartment. Older people, because of again, I'm not, I've kind of in the middle of this one, but older people might have been able to afford something small to buy. So I thought it was interesting how age had some play in that. We talked about actually, there's a young man named Eric who had to leave. He grew up in the city of Decatur, doesn't live here anymore because he can't afford to live here. But he talked about gentle density, and I'd never heard that before, and I thought that was a beautiful term to talk about. I'm sorry, somebody's saying something.
We're agreeing with you.
Oh, okay, sorry. I think that's a fantastic term. We also talked about being very careful with our words, that when we say affordable housing, that brings up the idea of Section 8 vouchers and a completely different thing than what we're trying to talk about. And so we need to be very, very intentional with our words. They thought that what we were talking about might also add to communities being even more walkable, that there are more people, you have more neighbors, there's more interaction, and that certainly the concept itself could help with diversity, not only to retain, but also to add. But I think our gem out of the whole discussion was that gentle density piece.
Great. I think I got all the groups there. Is there anyone else that I did not include? I think Bill wanted to say a couple quick words for all of you affordable housing enthusiasts on the call about the group that he heads up, the Regional Housing Forum, and then I'll do a closeout after he finishes.
Thanks, Kristin. And I would say John reported well in our small group, but one idea that did get raised is to be intentional about the folks that we're talking about. That the first party is people that work here, who we see and serve us every day. And us really be intentional about that instead of just opening the world. I just wanted to say that while this conversation's been going on for quite a while, we're not alone. I moderate the Atlanta Regional Housing Forum. It's been going on since the mid-'80s. Any of us can participate in that. I would commend our Mayor Patty and Angela and Andrea, who often either came to the Housing Forum before COVID, but now it's online. You can go back and see any of our past meetings at the Atlanta Regional Commission website, and you click into the Regional Housing Forum. That is to say, this very conversation is going on today in Sandy Springs, in Roswell, down in East Point as they're going through change. So we learn from each other, and kind of getting into that bigger tent and learning from each other, I think is very important. What we do there is really pay attention to language, a point that was just made about how we frame this issue, because oftentimes the framing is wrong, and that we take the long view. I know I had a beautiful oak tree in front of my house on Kings Highway that was 130 years old. It fell, it died and fell. Right away, we planted another oak tree. And 20 years later, it's a beautiful oak tree. So we've got to take the long view and know that this is not something that's isolated to Decatur. This is something that the whole region is going to have to address and is addressing. And that if we want to be the place that we all moved here for, that we're going to have to embrace some of the ideas and continue to be the community we want to live in.
Thank you very much, Phil. And I've attended a few of the meetings for the Regional Housing Forum over the years, and they're very informative, and hope everyone will get a chance to join. I'll go ahead and real quick share this website again, because the next steps are just to continue to get feedback. The website, decaturga.com/affordable housing, has a few more things you can go on. You can do the survey, so you can provide more input that way. I'll have a hotline phone number on there set up, so you can call me with questions. And there are 2 more sessions, so please encourage your neighbors to join, and friends, any groups that you're in. We really want to get as much feedback as we can. And I believe that's all that I have. We'll stay open for additional questions. So if anyone has anything they were not able to get answered during the session, go ahead and raise your hand, or I guess Renee might be able to unmute everyone so we can have a dialogue. And thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thanks, Kristin.
Thanks for getting us off to a great start, Kristin. And the other
Thank you. Thank you, panelists, facilitators, and attendees very much.
It was great. It was really great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm not sure if there's an answer to it yet. When we started this, Angela and Kristin were very clear about saying that the policy hadn't yet been formed, and we're doing this kind of engagement process to get community feedback to help create it. Do you all have a sense of a time frame for when you think there might be something to respond to, or are we trying to keep it a little open-ended because we're not sure what kind of feedback we're going to get?
Do you want to answer that, Angela, or I can give it a stab as well?
Go for it, Kristin. You're right in the middle of all
on the spot.
Yeah. Well, we'll go through the process of these Q&A sessions, these focused conversations. We'll gather input. The survey closes on November 15th, so we'll have the results of the survey. My hotline, I have a little pad of paper. I'm a big writer, so I'll be writing everyone's questions that they ask, and I'll be posting all the questions and answers up on the website. So I'll gather as much information as possible, and I'm assuming at that point, we will go ahead and do a draft write of this. And I feel like that will need some community feedback as we go through the next process, which is presenting to the Planning Commission and the City Commission, so that the community feels heard. Even though we are having these sessions, I want to make sure that we have ample time for discussion in between finishing these sessions and actually going to the commission. So there will be probably some sort of step in between for that. So I would say realistically, maybe it would be brought to the commission sometime in maybe the first quarter of next year. Do you think that's reasonable, Angela? Yeah.
This is Joan. I just got a question that really comes up in my mind. That is something I was unaware of. I learned here that there's going to be, I guess it's some study that says 1,700 new households would be formed in Decatur in the next 10 years, and 1,700 in the 10 years after that, I believe is what I heard. If we do nothing, what is our base case? We do nothing. Where are those people going to live? There aren't houses. There isn't land. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what the base case is we're working against, and how this proposal changes that.
Well, typically what happens in that case is the housing prices go up where it's desirable to live, which has been happening in Decatur and in Metro Atlanta over the years, and the sprawl gets larger. And anyone else feel free to chime in if there's something I'm leaving out. But so what has been happening in the Metro Atlanta area over time is rising housing prices and sprawl. So the sprawl creates more traffic and pollution. And so this is a policy that so many cities are looking at to try to ensure we can bring people in closer to the city to try to reduce some of the sprawl and traffic by allowing people that work in the cities to live in the cities.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me. I understand that. It's just, I don't see how there are going to be 3,400 new households in the city, short of putting a lot of tall high rises somewhere. I don't see us getting that many more households by putting a few duplexes in neighborhoods.
Joan,
I'm just confused how it's going to happen, period. And the prices going up does not make new households. I mean, it makes it more expensive to live here, but it doesn't make room for more people.
No, but I think, Joan, this is Elka, that what is likely to happen is that there'll be a replacement, that the housing that's now marginally affordable, the folks who are living in it will have to leave because they won't be able to afford it anymore. And folks coming in with higher incomes will take over that housing. So it's not that there's necessarily going to be 3,400 new units. There'll just be a recycling of who gets to live here.
So it's not 3,400 new households, it's 3,400 different households.
Well, it's 3,400 people who, over the next 20 years, who aren't currently living in Decatur. But I think if we don't do something, as you said, what's going to happen is that folks who are currently living in Decatur will be pushed out by the rising prices, and the new folks will come in and move into those units.
I want to add something. This is Eileen. That I think I know where Joan is coming from in like what she's trying to ask. Like if the studies say that 1,700 new families are coming in, but there's no housing for 1,700 families, where are they going to live? So in many cases, despite what, zoning allows and things like that, what we get are families moving in with other families. So it's essentially, people will share housing. Usually what will happen is it's, the people in the same family, like it'll be the grandparents or something like that. Where they'll just kind of move in, or even children coming back to live in their parents' house because they can't afford their own. And so, but the children and the children's families kind of considered their own household that is just sharing it with the household that is the parents. So what we see is it's not just about the unhoused, but that's kind of what's called underhoused. Is they will come and they will just share housing in many cases.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it was the mass balance that was giving me trouble. I couldn't figure. Okay, thank you.
Joan, these are all excellent points. And what I will add is that it is our commercial and high density residential districts, our zoning districts, that will absorb the most of those housing units, because there will be sufficient demand for those underutilized parcels where you still see surface parking. I mean, those still exist. And we have, 1 and 2 story buildings where the real estate market will be at a place where those could be redeveloped with more housing units. So it is the commercial and high density residential, around the MARTA stations in our downtown that will most likely absorb most of those households.
Okay, that makes sense. And if that's the case, what impact would doing the duplexes, triplexes? I mean, I think it's a nice idea. I would like to see the neighborhoods integrated more rather than have high density in one spot and low density in another.
Sure.
But does it make a significant impact to get us 3,400 more housing units?
Yeah. Well, what we do know, and this is something that my group spoke about, is not everyone wants to live in high-rise apartments, that they're not necessarily wanting a single family home, but a place to have a swing set and play with their grandchildren. They're looking for a different housing type that is so difficult to find in Decatur. They're limited, and it's hard to find a duplex or a triplex, something smaller where you really get to know your neighbors and be within a neighborhood. So that, I know that came up in my group.
Yeah,
Thank you for that question.
But that's not going to make affordable housing, because I can't imagine that a duplex is going to be cheaper than an apartment. And if people say they can't afford to stay in the apartments in Decatur because the prices are too high, I'm just struggling with, not the concept. I think the idea is great. I'm struggling with how this is going to work. It's not going to be affordable housing. It's going to be cheaper than an apartment. So,
well, Joe, one of the things that we talked about in our group was that notion of necessary but not sufficient, that changing the land use patterns and changing the zoning is a critical and important and foundational step, but that we're probably going to have to layer additional kind of policies and components over that to ensure that at least some big portion of those units are affordable and that they stay affordable over time. I think Philip had said something about the market has its own reason, and we have to figure out how to intervene in the market, not just produce more units and assume that capitalism is going to make sure that everything's affordable. But we talked about the land trust and mission driven developers and getting subsidy dollars to the city. There's a lot of things that need to happen. But what I will say is that, I don't know that one of the things that came up in our group was, are we too late? Have we waited so long that given current land prices, we're not going to be able to build our way out of this? And I don't want to be a downer, but I think that there's some validity there. I think we can bite into the problem, but unless we get some more lower cost land somewhere magically, we're not going to be able to 100% solve it from where we stand.
And that's where I was alluding to in terms of us coming up, being really creative, having partnerships with for example, our dominant employers in the city. There are ways. We as a people, when we have the will, we find a way. And I think we're approaching a place where we haven't been as a community, to my knowledge. And this will be the first time. So I'm just glad we had a good turnout and a good number of people who really seemed engaged. And it's going to take that kind of engagement and energy and for us to continue to make progress.
Paula? Oh, Paula had to leave. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, if there are no more questions, I guess we will wrap up the first session, and thank you so much for all your input from everyone.
Great job.
Just encourage everyone else to join in on the next session.